Well, welcome to our very first interview series, Between the Shelves with Mary. And today we are here with Dr. James Doty, the author of Into the Magic Shop. And we're thrilled that you came to spend some time with us today. I would ask if you would mind giving us a little synopsis of your book, Into the Magic Shop.
Sure. Well, it's really great to be with you, Mary, and to be the inaugural author. And we are actually between the bookshelves.
We are.
So this book is part neuroscience, part memoir, and part what we call contemplative practice. But what it really is, it tells the story of my own life. And as you know from having read the book, I grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was an invalid. She was paralyzed partially, had a seizure disorder, and was chronically depressed, attempted suicide multiple occasions. And additionally, we were on public assistance. Neither of my parents had gone to college. And what happened to me, though, was at the age of 12, I walked into a magic shop and met a woman named Ruth. And she was not the owner of the shop, she was the owner's mother. But that interaction with this woman ultimately changed the trajectory of my life, and in fact allowed me to accomplish many things. I was able to go to medical school, became a professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University, successful entrepreneur, and ultimately a philanthropist. But really, the most important thing she taught me, although I didn't realize it until somewhat later, was that the most important thing that one can do is open their heart.
Absolutely. And that is a lesson that is very well detailed within the book. And when I read about your getting into medical school, you did not go the traditional routes to get into med school. If I recall, you had not yet finished undergrad school.
Well, what happened is one applies to medical school before one finishes college, but typically in this day and age, and when I went to medical school, most of the students who applied were very good students. They had high GPAs. In fact, the average GPA when I applied to med school for acceptance was 3.79 out of 4. My GPA at the time was 2.53. But I had to work. I had to leave college multiple times to deal with complex parental issues, getting my father out of jail, dealing with my mother who was in the hospital after attempting suicide, but a whole variety of things that are not typically associated with a successful undergraduate experience. And and in fact, I was a number of units short from graduating. At that time, what was required was that you had a pre-med interview, or excuse me, an interview by a pre-med committee, and then they would write a letter of recommendation. And I went to request this appointment, and when I went to ask the secretary to give me a time, she looked at me and she said, "Well, I'm not going to, because it's a waste of everyone's time. You're never going to get into medical school." And I refused to accept that and said that I was not leaving until she gave me the appointment. And ultimately she did. And the thing was that I did have the appointment, and I walked into a room with 3 professors whose arms were crossed like this, and it was obvious they had already made their decision, and they had my file in front of them. And they basically chastised me for forcing them to sit through an interview. And again, they believed that I had no chance of getting to medical school. And over a course of about 45 minutes, with me primarily doing the talking, I asked them who gave them the right to destroy people's dreams, and more importantly, how dare they objectify me to a grade point average, when I am much more than that, and most people are, of course. And there's not one bit of evidence that a GPA is correlated with being a good doctor or a good person or anything. Now, certainly you do have to have some level of intelligence, but to make a long story short, at the end of our discussion, they were all crying. And they ended up giving me the highest letter recommendation you could get. And the interesting thing, though, that shows you this concept of synchronicity is as I was leaving, the secretary, who had been somewhat, not necessarily nice, but she was doing her job, she had, I think, overheard our conversation, and she handed me a brochure. And I still remember it was this green trifold brochure, and it advertised a summer research program or summer research and enrichment program at Tulane University. And but the deadline had passed. But I thought it was a perfect opportunity. It was for minority and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So I called the woman in charge of it, or who founded it, and convinced her to let me in. And ultimately, I applied to one medical school, and that was the one I got accepted. And they accepted me, in fact, with that GPA. And I did not get an undergraduate degree initially, but I did okay.
I would say so, absolutely. And the takeaway for me from the book was, you can do all these things, and if you read the book, you will learn these secrets to quieting your mind, quieting your body, visualizing where you want to be. But if you don't do it with an open heart, even if you make the money, you won't be happy. That you've got to lead with your heart, and you learn that the hard way.
Right. So basically, I outlined four things, or four tricks, I call them, because this did occur in a magic shop. And those four sort of things that Drew taught me, one of which was gaining attention and focus, which is necessary to meet goals or achieve goals, but also understanding that oftentimes we have emotions that make us tense and not able to relax. And if you're not able to do that, it's hard to have attention and focus. Then the other thing that she taught me, and which so many people have, is a negative dialogue going on in their head. And for some reason, many people are hypercritical of themselves and beat themselves up. And she taught me how to change that hypercritical dialogue to one of self-affirmation. And then, of course, we talked about opening the heart, which I'll get back to. But the other important thing was to have clarity of intention. And she taught me that visualizing what one wants can be very powerful. At 12, when I had this experience, I didn't quite process opening the heart, because as a kid I was focused on, I looked around at my own situation. We lived in a very small apartment. We had been evicted. We didn't have a car. And so I thought that what I wanted was to have everything monetary, and so I worked very hard to achieve these things, but ultimately I achieved them, and I had never been more unhappy. And it wasn't until essentially I lost everything and then had an opportunity to get everything back, but in the process gave it all away voluntarily to be of service to others, that my life really changed. And really that experience and what has happened, that must be my phone.